Gordon, please. All right. Hey, how's everybody doing today? My name is Randy Hagan. I lead technical training for North America, and it is a pleasure to have you here. We are going to go through a little bit of housekeeping, and then we are going to get into some great information. There's a Q&A button on your screen. Go ahead and put all your questions in there, and then we will address those questions either throughout the session or at the end of it. So put your questions in the Q&A. There is a chat button as well. I may send out something periodically on that, but put your questions over in the Q&A. If you are CCA accredited, at the end of this session, there will be a QR code and you can receive 1.5 integrated pest management CEUs for that. And we are also recording this session. And after our second session at the end of this month, we will share the recording with folks so you can hear it and use it as a resource as well. But this is your time, so make sure that you address your questions and you get answers. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the European corn borer update and management strategies for you. Next slide, please. We've got a host of great presenters today, and you're going to be hearing from all of them. We've got Adam Pfeffer, who you'll be hearing from shortly. He's our agronomic solutions lead up in Canada. We've got Kim Morrell, who is the senior scientist and corn project field entomologist. We've got Caitlin Keschmeyer, who's entomology team lead. We've got Jason Wells, who is our crop development specialist at the province of New Brunswick. We've got Jocelyn Smith, who is the assistant professor in field crop entomology at the University of Guelph Ridgetown campus. We've got Caitlin Congdon, who is field crop specialist at Purina Food and Agriculture. And we've got Sebastian Schoening, who is a farmer in Nova Scotia. And we also have Adrian Helder, who is a farmer in New Brunswick. So a great host of very, very good people to listen to and hear our presentation today. We're going to kick this thing off with a poll question, and I forgot to mention that earlier. There will be a poll question that pops up on your screen. And so if you want to pull that up, Tiffany, and you can go ahead and answer this. Have you experienced any European corn borer in your fields? Your choices are yes, no, or I'm just not sure if I even know what it is. So go ahead. We're going to give you a few seconds to answer that. And we'll have a couple more polls also throughout the presentation. And this helps our presenters understand a little bit better what level of concern you have or knowledge you have as well. So I'm going to give you 5 more seconds to go ahead and answer. All right. So we'll end the poll. So about 60% said yes, they have experienced European corn borer. About 16% said no, and about 25% said, I'm not real sure. And so this will be a good presentation for all of you to access and have a good understanding on. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce Adam Pfeffer, and Adam's going to kick us off with a nice welcome and expectations and walk through the agenda. Adam?
Thanks, Randy. Appreciate everybody's time today. This webinar has been quite a while in the making, and really the purpose of what we want to accomplish here in the next hour and a half or so is to provide an update on where things are at with European corn borer and really provide an opportunity to ask questions, have your questions answered. But really, we want to leave you with really good information today on how to scout, what the impacts are of this pest, and what we're seeing. And really, and Jocelyn will jump into it in her first section here. This is a pest that's been in North America for a decade, or not a decade, a century. We have had really good technology to help manage it. And we're starting to see that technology break down, especially in the maritime provinces. So that's really what we want to highlight today is, what we're seeing with the technology we have at our disposal today, and really focus on how to manage this pests going forward, and really help people think how to incorporate some management strategies into their farm. So we'll kick things off with Dr. Jocelyn Smith, on pest history, range of distribution, and some of the work that she's been doing with her lab. Adrian Helders joined us to provide some practical scouting tips. The last 2 years, we've had a fairly broad survey looking for this pest in the Maritimes and some other areas of Canada. I'll provide a brief update on what we found in our scouting activities for the last 2 years. And then Sebastian's going to provide a European perspective to this pest. It's a certainly very devastating pest over in Europe without access to BT technology. Really, he's got some great perspective on how he's managed that pest historically. And then Jason and Caitlin will wrap up the program here today, talking about management recommendations and then some impacts to silage and grain yield. And then we'll have a wrap up and Q&A. So we'll keep it fairly informal today. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat in the Q&A, and we'll address those as we go. So with that, we'll pass it over to Jocelyn.
Okay, thanks, Adam. And welcome, everybody. I'm going to hopefully give you some context and history first off here about European corn borer, and then tell you a little bit of the background, why this has become such an important issue that we're talking about today. So as Adam mentioned, this pest has been in North America for over 100 years, and it's historically been one of our most significant and important corn pests. Fun fact, I don't know if you knew this, but way back, we even had a Corn Borer Act in Canada that was implemented so that growers were required to manage populations of European corn borer. The government even had inspectors in Ontario who would go around to make sure that growers were destroying the overwintering habitat of this pest, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And so it was, that just gives you some idea of the seriousness of this insect in the past. And you can go to the next slide, Adam. You're going to hear more about the damage and the yield impacts of it, but in my first slide there, I briefly talked about yield loss, harvestability problems, ear rots and stalk rots that come along with this insect as well. But this map on the left side of the screen here gives you an idea of the current distribution of European corn borer in North America. As I mentioned, it came in about 100 years ago, and they think that some of the very first introductions were in southwestern Ontario, in the St. Thomas area, where there was a broom corn factory that somehow they came over in this broom corn, but also into the New England states. That's also some of the early range of the European corn borer. But over time, it's kind of expanded to almost every major corn growing region in the continent. And as you can see, going south to north, the further south you are, the more generations of corn borer you can have per year, of course, because that all depends on temperature. In Canada, we probably see primarily univoltine or one generation per year of European corn borer, but there are some warmer areas in southwestern Ontario and Quebec, and maybe even into the Maritimes. We're still figuring this out right now, where you might have up to 2 generations, and in really warm years, even the beginning of a third. But this figure on the right shows you the typical timing of the different stages of its life cycle in what I think is happening in the Maritimes here. And it's important to note, we're going to talk about managing this insect, that they overwinter in corn stubble. And so that's a big part of the story right now. But actually, most of their life cycle is spent inside that corn plant, right? Once the moths that you can see flying around in June and July, they don't stay in the cornfields for mating. They leave the fields, go find mates outside of the field, fly into a field that looks desirable for them to lay their eggs. And then once those eggs hatch, the corn borer larvae get inside the plant pretty quickly. They'll do a little bit of leaf feeding, they'll go into the midrib of the leaves, and then they spend most of the rest of their life boring up and down the corn stalks. And as we get into the fall and winter, they go further down the corn stalk and they stay in that bottom part of like bottom 30 centimeters of the stalk to overwinter. And then they'll pupate there again in the spring and fly out of that field, and the cycle starts again. So that's a little bit on the life history of this insect. And we can go to the next slide, Adam. Here are some pictures of some of those different stages. You've got the adult moth in the top left. We've got a little egg mass there that you can see. They're usually on the underside of the leaves. Some of the leaf feeding on the next image over. And then some of the stalk boring symptoms. You see holes in the stalk. If you split the stalk open, you'll see tunnels, and you see this frass or insect poop, that's the technical term for it, that will be around those borer holes on the outside of the stalk. And that far right picture shows a little corn borer head popping out of the bottom of a corn stalk where we cut the stalk to show how far down they go to overwinter. So next slide, Adam. Okay, so because of that behavior of this insect and how they spend most of their time inside the stalk, they're really difficult to target with insecticides. So controlling them has always been a real challenge. And that's why that Corn Borer Act was created. That's why growers were required to just destroy the corn stubble as one of our best bets to manage them. There are some natural enemies out there that do parasitize corn borers and so on, but sometimes populations build up to a point that they're really problematic. And so when BT technology came around, this was such a great tool to use to control European corn borer. And this was the original target pest for all of the BT traits that we see now. I mean, it all started with European corn borer. And so the first one that came to the market was back in 1996. So, over 25 years ago, since then, we've been using this technology. The first products that came to the market were called Yield Guard Corn Borer by Monsanto back in the day. And I think, as growers, we're most familiar with the different trade names that you see around BT traits these days. I'm going to show you the more technical terms right now, which describe the proteins that are being expressed by those plants that the insects are susceptible to, so that when they eat it, it kills them. Right. So Cry1AB was the first protein that came to the market, developed by Monsanto and Northrop King back in the day, in the 1990s. If we progress to the next step, there was a new protein developed by Dow AgroSciences that came to market in 2002 called Cry1F. And that was marketed as Herculex technology by Pioneer and others at the time. And then the most recent proteins that have become available were developed by Monsanto and commercialized in 2008. And there were two of them that they put together in the same event, Cry1A.105 and Cry2AB2. Now, all these letters and numbers aren't going to mean much to us, most of the time, but that's just how they describe these proteins in the plant. So, each of these three different events that we're showing here were the original products that came to the market and were produced in plants individually. But over time, we got to a point where we could pyramid multiple traits here into plants. And that's when we first saw Smart Stacks come to the scene, maybe around 2008 as well, which was a pyramid. When we say pyramid, we mean it's got more than one protein that targets the same pest. So the pyramid that was in Smart Stacks was Cry1A.105, Cry2AB2, and Cry1F. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, Adam. A little more history here. These little graphs on the left show you that in some of the Midwestern states, they do annual surveys for European corn borers going back to 1962, as you can see. And those lines that are kind of going up and down are just kind of normal population cycles of European corn borer that were happening in those states. The red dotted line there on the graph shows 1996 when BT corn came to the market. And those gray bars in the background show the adoption of BT corn. So it went from 0 to currently we're about 85% in Canada and the US. 85% of our corn produces proteins to control European corn borer. But you can see the population lines of those corn borers in each of those states, which declined almost down to zero by the 2000s. And that's been the same thing that we've observed in Ontario as well. We've almost eradicated corn borer in some regions. And this was a huge economic benefit to people using BT corn, but also we know that there's been a real halo or kind of spillover effect to other growers as well, like organic producers, since we've basically suppressed the whole populations of European corn borer across the board. It's really reduced pest pressure for them, as well as a lot of vegetable producers, because corn borers will also infest some vegetable crops, as I'm sure people out east know well. They can be a pest of potatoes as well, sometimes wheat, hemp, millet, all kinds of different things. But corn seems to be their number one. But anyway, so this whole BT corn system has been really beneficial for more than just corn producers. And if you want to go to the next slide, Adam, we can talk a little bit about why. Well, this technology was just so good for European corn borer from the beginning. All of those cry proteins that we talked about a few slides ago were like the corn borer populations were really, really susceptible to them. And so any of those proteins would kill more than 99.9% of the corn borer population in North America. So that was great. That was part of the success story. The next thing is that we also required that you had to have a refuge for BT corn. And some of us might remember this with disdain to some degree, right? Where you had to plant a 20% refuge. The whole point of that being that if there are any rare resistant insects out there in the population naturally, which there are, it's just really low frequency, they would mate with susceptible corn borers who hadn't been exposed to these BT proteins, and then we keep the resistance genes really diluted in the population. So the refuge plus the high dose was really successful. And as we move towards pyramiding more of these proteins in the same plant, which is my next point on the screen, that enabled us to even reduce the refuge size, because the more modes of action essentially you have working against the pest, we can get away with less refuge. And so that's why we shifted it to 5% refuge in the bag, because it was so successful for European corn borer. It's not quite as successful with all the other target pests, but for corn borer, it was okay. And lastly, I just want to point out that with all of these insect resistance management things we were doing for European corn borer, we've been monitoring corn borer populations since the beginning of corn borer or of BT corn deployment in North America, and we never had any cases of BT resistance evolution in European corn borer to date. However, this is where the story starts to change, and why we're talking to everybody here in Eastern Canada. In 2018, we got some phone calls that there was a lot of corn borer injury happening in some BT corn in Nova Scotia. And so we went out there and made collections from about 5 different fields around Truro. Well, sorry, 4 around Truro, 1 over in the Annapolis Valley. And if you go to the next slide, we had anywhere in these fields, anywhere from 30 to 70% of the plants with corn borer injury in them. And all of those fields in that Truro area, we found out were producing only Cry1F protein. So these were not pyramid hybrids. They were still just single toxin hybrids. And the corn borers definitely looked resistant. So we made these collections. We made one collection over in the Annapolis Valley, as I mentioned, because we wanted to get something upwind, thinking the corn borers wouldn't be flying in that direction. So maybe they would be susceptible out there. So we collected some from some non-BT corn out there that year. And on the next slide, this is what we do in my lab. We do what we call bioassays with these corn borers, where we expose them to the purified protein, that Cry1F protein that's in the plant. We put it over some diet in those little trays you can see up in the top right corner, and we measure how much mortality there is out of a sample of corn borer larvae over a week's time. And so on the left side of that graph, we have the 2 lines, the black and orange lines, which show a couple populations from Ontario that we tested. And we saw really high rates of mortality at a low concentration of Cry1F. The concentration of Cry1F is across the bottom of the screen there. And And so for our susceptible populations, we get an LC50 value from these tests of about 6.5 nanograms of Cry1F. However, you can see that all 5 of those Nova Scotia populations along the bottom, we couldn't kill them with up to 200 nanograms of Cry1F. So they were extremely resistant to the protein. They were probably at least more than 30 times resistant to the protein compared to susceptible populations. And we know from other pests, similar things, that if you have a resistance ratio over 10, that's usually when you start to see field failures. And we were already at 30 here in 2018. So we can go to the next slide, Adam. So here's the map back from 2018. Those orange points show us where we found our Cry1F resistant populations. If we go to the next slide, in 2019, we did more sampling. We've started to connect with more of our collaborators out in the Maritimes. And you can see we picked up more Cry1F resistant populations in a greater range in Nova Scotia that year. We have a population up there in PEI, one over in New Brunswick in 2019 that were fine. They looked okay, still susceptible to Cry1F at that time. And we tested them on all of those different Cry proteins each time we bring them into the lab. And I should say, if they're green on the map here, they're susceptible to everything still. But yes, we also had we also have populations from Ontario, Quebec, and Manitoba, as you can see in this slide. And surprisingly, in 2019, we did pick up one Cry1F population near Montreal, Quebec, and one out near Carman in Manitoba. So that wasn't great to see. And if we keep going, we've been doing more sampling every year. In 2022, basically the highlight on this map is that purple dot in Truro, where we went back to the original Cry1F resistance detection field, sampled nearby there. And, instead of just Cry1F plants at this time, they had removed those and replaced them with Cry1F, Cry1A-B plants. And we found that population had developed resistance to Cry1A-B as well. Go, I think, to the next slide. Another way we're looking at resistance monitoring is by using sentinel plots. So we're planting these different traits with sweet corn and field corn hybrids out there in a few different locations. In New Brunswick in 2023, we were really surprised to see, if you hit the next button there, and I'll circle a couple bars on that graph that show we had a lot of corn borer feeding in Cry1AB, Cry1A.105, and Cry2AB2 plants in New Brunswick in 2023. So that was the first time we really saw field injury on those traits. And if you hit the button again, a collaborator of ours in Connecticut had the same kind of sentinel plot, and they saw a similar problem down there in Connecticut. The population wasn't quite as extreme. The pressure was definitely higher in New Brunswick, but the fact that we're starting to see this in the US is concerning, and it could be that they're spreading. They are probably spreading from Canada as well. So I think we've just got 1 or 2 more slides here to show that. Continuing our sampling and our testing, we're starting to see some more populations with resistance to Cry1A.105 in New Brunswick in this slide here. And I think we can go to the next slide. I guess that just summarizes everything. So to this point, to date, we have picked up resistance to Cry1F, if you advance, in Nova Scotia, Quebec, Manitoba, and New Brunswick. We've picked up Cry1A-B resistance in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and 1A.105 and possibly 2AB2 resistance in New Brunswick and Connecticut as well. So that's kind of the background as to what we're here to talk about today. And I think we're going to let Adrian take it from here and talk about how everybody can start looking for it in the Maritimes on their own farms.
Okay, I'm just going to see if my video will work. Okay, there we go. Perfect. Hi, I'm Adrian Helder. My husband and I have a dairy farm near Salisbury, New Brunswick, one of that place with a little cluster of stars on Jocelyn's map. And we've been growing corn silage there probably since about 2016. For the past 2 years, I've had the pleasure of scouting for European corn borer for Bayer through egg call in the Maritimes. So I've been over a lot of the southern part of New Brunswick, some of the northern parts of Nova Scotia, and also a little bit on the island. I've had the opportunity to see lots of cool places in the Maritimes, and I've met some amazing corn producers. I've seen a lot of corn, and I have found a lot of bugs. So, as one of the pairs of boots on the ground, so to speak, Adam asked me if I could share some practical scouting tips. So, let's get into it. All right, so this guy here on your screen, I like to call him my ECB glamour shot. He's the first ECB larva that I found on a BT traded plant back in 2023. So I thought I should capture that moment. But anyways, what are some of the signs of European corn borer? So what you can see in the field are broken or missing tassels. You can see broken stalks. You can see shot holes in leaves, and Jocelyn showed a few pictures of that, and we'll see a few more in the future. You could see bore holes in the stalks with that frass extruding. Sick looking plants. So plants that may have kind of reddish tinge in their stalks and leaves, and some weak stalks. So just remember that European corn borer, it can be found anywhere on the corn plant from the tassel to the stalk below the soil level even, but it's rarely found within the cob in my experience. I think I may have seen one in the cob shank, but if I'm finding any larva in the cob area, it's most commonly been the corn earworm or the western bean cutworm. Okay, so let's look into this a little bit more in depth. So the signs of European corn borer, the broken or missing tassels and stalks. So the picture on the left you'll see is one I took in 2023 in a non-traded field, and it was just completely full of European corn borer. So you can see that reddish tinge to the stalk. You probably can't even see any missing tassels because most of the stalks were just broken over. So when you're walking your field, a broken stalk, if you see that, it could just be environmental damage. An animal could have walked through, bent that stalk over. But if I was walking in a field and I saw that plant bent over like that, I would definitely go take a closer look, because that could be a point, that the bent point could be a point where the borer has entered the plant. So we can go to the next slide, Adam. Thanks. Okay. So the next sign are the shot holes that you'll see in the leaves. Um, so the picture on the right, we've got a little cameo appearance there from Dr. Art Sjasma, who's Professor Emeritus at University of Guelph, and he's one of the big ECB guys. With his research. He's also my dad, so he he happened to be visiting when I was practicing scouting and came out and gave me some great tips, which was really helpful. But the other reason why I chose that picture was when I was scrolling through my camera roll to see if I could find any good pics for this webinar, and I happened to glance those two shot holes up in that leaf there. So when you're looking for the shot holes in the field, it's handy to kind of look for maybe shafts of light that could be coming through, and that's sort of how you'll notice them. Like Jocelyn mentioned, the larvae really like to be inside the plant. So that shot hole pattern is created when the larvae are chewing their way through the leaves, when they're kind of folded up or tucked in the whorl. And then as the plant grows and the leaves unfurl, you'll see that pattern. It reminds me a lot of The Very Hungry Caterpillar. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but if you see big bites out of like the sides of the leaves, those are not made by European corn borer. Those are something else, but it's that shot hole pattern through the leaf that will be common. All right, let's look at the next slide. All right, so boreholes and frass, like Jocelyn said, that's bug poop. That's what we call it. So like Jocelyn said, those larvae, they want to be inside the plant, and so they're pushing in and they're eating, and what comes out is the frass. So those are some good clues. You can see they do a lot of damage with their borehole, that photo on the left. We've got some really nice shot holes there that you can see, and also the borehole where the corn borer would have entered the plant, and it's got that that crease in the stalk. You can see the stalk is starting to show some stress with the red streaks in it. And then the photo in the middle, it's by all accounts would look like an otherwise healthy stalk, but you can see that borehole going up in the left-hand side there. And you can also see some nice little pinhole shot holes in the photo on the right. All right, let's see what's next. Okay, so practical scouting tips. What is the best thing that you can do? You need to walk your field. So it's not always possible to spot European corn borer damage just from driving by. You may be able to spot a broken tassel, maybe, but you're really going to get the best information by getting into your field. So even just walking the outside row of your field could be helpful, especially if you're walking a traded field, because you're likely to hit one or two of those refuge plants that are growing in your field. And if it's a traded field that doesn't have a lot of pressure, you're going to see the corn borer more likely in those refuge plants, obviously. So that will help. But the best thing to do is go a couple rows into even the headlands and just walk up and down a row. You want to keep your eyes kind of moving up and down. You want to look up and down the stalk and kind of glance a bit ahead and keep your eye peeled for something that looks like it sticks out a bit. So there's a stalk tipped over or something that looks red or sick compared to the rest of the plants around it. And as Jocelyn mentioned earlier, earlier in the season when you're looking for the ECB, so this would be like, maybe late July, early August, you're going to see more damage higher up on the plant. So yeah, that little guy down there in the corner, I saw him on July 22nd. So he's still quite small. I tried to give you a bit of a scope of perspective with the picture behind it. So I had really zoomed in on the photo on the bottom right, but the little guy up top is more to scale. And you can see how much frass that little guy has created with his chewing. And then later in the season, the corn borer does move down the plant. So you're going to see more damage lower on the lower areas of the stalk, and even a lot of boreholes later in the season I found were between that last leaf and then where the stalk meets the ground. And again, I look for plants that stand out, broken or discolored, and I often would use the wiggle method. So if I see a plant that kind of stands out, looks maybe sick, I just grab the stalk a little bit and give it a little wiggle. And then if you might find a weak point there, and then you can go down to that weak point and see if you find yourself a borehole. And we've got some great other picks here. We've got that broken tassel. We've got the borehole in the frass. We've got some nice tunneling there. And sometimes you may mistake corn pollen for frass. If you're not really sure what it is, wipe it away. And if it's frass, there's going to be a borehole somewhere. So if it's just pollen that may have fallen down into a leaf or down, tucked in between the leaf and the stalk, if there's no borehole, it's, yeah. Okay, some great other pics of some pinholes. So you can see those nice juicy baby leaves that the larvae have been feeding on, all nicely tucked in, and as they emerge, you can see the holes. So I don't know, Adam, do we have the video still? Oh yeah, there we go. See, borehole there right near the ground in the left-hand photo, and then another little guy tucked in there. So they do like to stay in the plant for sure. Okay.
So this plant here is right next to a traded plant that had a dead corn borer in it. As you can see, the tassel looks great. You do not really see any flea damage. That there is from the next plant over. Nothing, 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 nothing. And I just happened to glance over and I was inspecting the plant beside it, and what do I see here but a borehole with some frass. And I just completed the gene check, and it is, I've wiped the frass away just so I could make sure it's a borehole. And this is a traded plant, so I'm going to open it up and see what I see.
Okay, so the point of that video was just to show you that sometimes
So
the
this,
plant, oh yeah, thank you for thank you for turning me off again. Just to show you that the rest of the plant can look perfectly healthy. So looking just for those broken tassels, it may not give you the best chance of finding the larva. So anyway, with that, thank you. I hope that was helpful, and I'll turn it back over to Adam.
Hey, before we do that, Adrian, we're going to pull up another poll real quick here and have everybody participate in this. So, question is, are you concerned about European corn borer in 2025? I know you answered earlier that, some of you have experienced it and seen them and that, but as you think about going into this next season now, is this a concern for you? Again, choices are yes, no, or not real sure. So, give you a few seconds to go ahead and answer that poll as well. I'm going to give you about 5 more seconds. All right. So there is some concern out there, and that 73% said yes, 8% said no, and about 20% said, well, we're not real sure yet. So we can stop sharing that and we will move on. Adam, there's some good numbers for you to work with. And so we'll jump into your presentation.
Thanks, Randy. So yeah, I thought I'd just jump in with a couple slides to talk about the survey that we've conducted the last couple of years. And Jocelyn and Adrian have certainly done an awesome job to talk about the scouting and kind of the background. But really, the aha moment for me was when Jocelyn went back out to the Maritimes and discovered the Cry1AB resistance along with Cry1F. And that really shot the alarm bells off that we need to have a closer look at our traded material, which is the Cry1A 105 2AB. So that's the VT Double Pro traded product, which is the dominant sort of most of our corn mix that we sell in Canada, but especially in the Maritimes. So in 2023, we surveyed 150 fields, and thanks to folks like Adrian, and I see Adam on the call here as well, working with AgCall, we did focus most of our efforts in the Maritimes, but we also had a look in Manitoba, Quebec as well, based on the historical findings of Jocelyn and her team. We found 24 fields that year that had some feeding and refuge, but it really wasn't until Jason was kind enough to have a fairly heavy feeding on some traded material in the Sussex region in their Sentinel plots that highlighted us. And then Adrian was able to double back in that neighborhood, and she did find a larva that she shared a picture of there actually in a traded field. So that really put the alarm bells up for us and knew that we had to do a deeper scout in that neighborhood and also continue our work in 2024. And you can see in 24, we expanded that to 173 fields, again, in the same areas in the same provinces. We found 53 fields with European corn borer feeding and refuge plants, 13 fields that had traded material with some level of injury, and 21 larva samples were sent to Jocelyn's lab at Ridgetown. So again, second year, scouts had more experience, and we found a significant number of populations around. We did do a follow-up visit in September with Kim and Kates that have joined us here today. And we did a deeper dive into some of these fields and were able to find 8 fields, 5 that were traded VT Double Pro, 3 were non-VT, where the process is a 30 plant destructive sampling method where we measure tunnel length and gene check kits. And of those 5 traded fields, we identified 2 that fit the criteria for unexpected injury and did make that submission to the CFIA, which is the first time European corn borer has ever been reported to regulatory agency globally. So it is a fairly big deal. But that being said, we only recovered 4 surviving larvae from those traded plants. So most of the larvae are still getting killed, which is encouraging, but they are eating more than they should be able to eat. So just a map here. Again, green pins in the Maritimes, or sorry, green pins are fields that we didn't find any. Then you can see the orange pins here, mainly in Adrian's neighborhood. I don't know if she secretly planted them there or her dad did historically to kickstart this problem, but yeah, Adrian was definitely able to find some last year. But the big change when we look at the 24 map here is the number of yellow pins. Green pins, we didn't find anything. Yellow pins where we found it at refuge plants. And then the red and orange pins here indicate fields where we found feeding and traded materials. So really the message here is fairly widespread, certainly, starting in the Truro region, the Annapolis Valley. But I would consider this whole region that I'm circling with my mouse where we see these yellow and red pins to be a hot zone for populations that do have some level of resistance to the traded products. I know Kate and Kim will touch a little bit on some of the work that they're doing later on this morning. So again, fairly widespread activity this past year, and we do have plans in 25 again to look into some of these areas a bit deeper and expand our scouting elsewhere throughout North America. So just to give you an indication on some of the levels of feeding that we were seeing, these pictures came from a field in Prince Edward Island that Adam was kind enough to find. The top portion of the table here with these plants, these are all double pro traded plants, and you can see the amount of tunneling that these insects were able to do. Most of these are 1 inch to 2 inches long. Some plants had multiple holes within them. And then on the bottom here, 2 refuge plants where you can see the extent of that injury, really almost spanning node to node or even going between nodes. So again, the trait is double pro trait is still having activity, but in a completely susceptible population, we wouldn't see any of this feeding on these plants. So again, with the selection pressure, with the high selection intensity in this area, we are seeing breakdown of the traits. And then you can see on the right-hand side here, these are the gene check kits that essentially anything with 2 lines is a plant that is traded. So it is, it's fairly alarming what we found in 24, and that's really why we wanted to provide this webinar today, to really be transparent about what we're seeing in the field, to try and minimize some of the confusion and distraction that we've seen, and just really try to provide a very clear message that there is a problem, and it is something that we definitely need to address as an industry, from ag retail industry, folks like ourselves at Bayer, right down to the farmer level. So again, just wanted to share some thoughts there. And now I'll pass it over to Sebastian to share some of his experiences.
Yeah, hello. My name is Sebastian from West Linden Farm in Cumberland County in Nova Scotia, and we have about 80 to 100 acres of grain corn in our rotation. We moved from Germany to Nova Scotia about 2 years ago, and that's why I'm unfortunately used to the issues with the European corn borer. And yeah, that's why I'm really know how bad it can be. I've seen many cornfields with really bad damage, and it's not only the massive yield loss alone. Sometimes it's almost not possible to harvest the corn anymore. So yeah, there's some pictures, the left pictures from my own farm back in Germany. The middle and the right picture are from France or farms around in my area. So yeah, and it's not everything. It's not everything getting worse with the corn falling down.
You muted yourself there, Sebastian. I don't know if you can hear me. Might have touched your phone.
Sorry, it's my
There we go.
fault. So I've seen many cornfields with really bad damage, and it's not the massive yield loss alone. Sometimes it's almost not possible to harvest, as shown in the picture with the combine on the left hand. And that's not everything. It's getting worse because of all the corn cobs that they are falling down. They attract the wild boars, and they destroy the following crop in the next year while digging out the cobs. So yeah, it is not allowed to grow GMO corn in Europe. That's why we had to handle the European corn borer. They are always conventional. That means we have to spray the corn with insecticide at least 2 times, sometimes 3 times, or use the trichogramma wasps. Also at least 2 times, sometimes 3 times. And the trichogramma wasps need to be applied by hand or with drones. And both ways are quite expensive and time sensitive. So, and both ways have limited success, and it's key to keep the pressure low. So therefore, the crop rotation is really important. Mulching the corn stubbles with a mulcher, if possible, do a fall tillage. So actually, whatever is possible to make it uncomfortable for the larvae to overwinter. Yeah, we try to have at least a 4-year rotation with corn on our farm. We mulch the corn stubbles with a flame mower right after harvest, and we do a fall tillage with a harrow in late fall as soon as it's possible. So in my opinion, key is to keep the pressure down, and that's why it's so important that all corn growers work together. I don't want to see the issues that bad with the ECB like we had in Germany. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Sebastian. Jason, Caitlin?
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to start things off with some management recommendations, and Jason might jump in here when he has something to add. But just to kind of look back, like Jocelyn said, this pest has been around for over 100 years in Canada and North America. But the story's a little bit interesting when you look at the Maritimes specifically. So I know in Nova Scotia, we really only started growing corn at all in very small acreages in the 70s. So if you look at this chart, this is corn production in all 3 maritime provinces. And back in 1981, there was just about 23,000 hectares of total corn production in the 3 provinces, and only 4,600 hectares of that was grain corn. So fast forwarding a little bit to the introduction of BT corn in the mid to late 90s, corn acreage had actually dropped off again since then. And we were down to about 14,000 hectares. And then climbing up to 2021, we've seen a huge increase in corn production across all 3 provinces. So both in total, we're over 70,000 hectares, and I would say that number's probably a little bit up since 2021. But the really big growth has been in grain corn production. So at almost 40,000 hectares of grain corn, which is, there's quite a lot of stock being left in the field on grain corn. So that's quite a lot of opportunity for European corn borer to be overwintering. So Jocelyn covered this earlier, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate that there are 4 BT proteins that target European corn borer. So we've got Cry1AB, Cry1F, Cry1A.105, and Cry2AB2. And we can just skip through the next one, I think, Adam. Yeah, so we talked about, the next slide completely. Yeah, there we go. So we've got suspected resistance to Cry1AB, resistance to Cry1F in multiple areas, and suspected resistance to the Cry1A.105. The key there being that Cry1A.105 and Cry2AB2 are used together. So, yeah. But what does that actually mean on your field? What do you see when you're buying a bag of corn? So moving on to the next one. The slide has a lot on it, but if you want to take a screenshot or take a picture of this one, I think this would be a good thing to be able to refer back to. So this is all of the corn hybrids that are currently available that were in the 2024 Maritime Corn Test. And I've just gone through and highlighted the different trait names. So not the proteins, but the actual trait names that you would see on the bag or coming from your seed supplier. So on the bottom, starting in purple, we've got VT Double Pro. And if you look up into the tables above that, it shows you which proteins those correspond to that. Then in the orange, we've got Optimum Acre Max. In green, we have Viptera. And in blue, we have Agrisure Duracade. So those are the names that you are going to see on your corn that correspond to different BT proteins or different combinations of BT proteins in your actual corn hybrid. If there's something that's not, that you are growing, that's not on there, then I definitely encourage you to check out the BT trait table, which you can find on cornpest.ca. And that's a really great table. It's updated every year, and it has the name of the trait and which proteins and which pests it's targeting. So you can find out exactly what you've got in your field. All right, moving along, this is just another picture of the damage, but this was from, I believe, one of Jason's Sentinel plot photos. And you can just see a stark difference between the non-BT corn that's been really damaged by the corn borer and the BT corn, where obviously the traits are still holding up. And we just want to do everything that we can to start changing our management practices and looking at this now so that we don't get into the situation of things looking like the non-BT section there. I do just want to highlight a couple of our other corn pests that could be mistaken just because they are found in corn and in roughly the same locations on the plant. So the first one is corn earworm. As the name would suggest, it's normally found in the ear of the corn, and it can be all these lovely different colors. But yes, as Adrian mentioned earlier, typically European corn borer is going to be found in the stalk, sometimes the shank of the cob, but not as often or not very often at all in the actual cob itself. The other one, not to be mistaken for, is Western bean cutworm, which again is most often found in the cob and causing a lot of damage there. And those are another issue for another day. So if you're going to get out and scout, as Adrian gave us lots of great tips for that, but when do you need to be doing that? This is a graph of some trapping that we were doing in Nova Scotia, just outside of Truro last year. And we were actually looking at a comparison of the different pheromone strains and some different trap types to figure out what was working best. This is just an amalgamation of all of that information. And you can clearly see that the peak flight last year was around mid-July. So if we're thinking about when we want to get out, the moths are flying around in around July, and that's when they're going to start laying eggs. So that would be the best time to start looking for egg masses and some of that early larval damage. This is a really great chart that that Jocelyn's team put together. And again, this is showing just that life cycle in the Maritimes. So starting out, they do overwinter as larvae, kind of until the May period when it starts to get warm enough. They pupate and then they emerge as adults. They're laying eggs kind of in that late July, early August period. And then when we're really going to start seeing that feeding damage from the larvae is from anywhere from like mid-August in through September. and even into October, November. So we're doing a number of different things, but we're monitoring via traps across the 3 maritime provinces. And we also have these sentinel plots that got mentioned earlier. So they act as an alert system to identify insect populations. And in particular, we're looking at European corn borer in this case. They do contain a BT and a non-BT version of the same corn hybrid, so that you can really compare those differences. It's also a really great place to see damage in person, because it's one thing to look at pictures and to hear descriptions of what this damage looks like, but to actually see it in person can be a little bit different. Jason, do you want to add anything there? You're still muted.
My wife wishes I had that feature full time, actually. So that's a picture of the sentinel plot from 2023 that Adam alluded to earlier, where we noticed the significant damage in pretty well every corn that was in there. I think seven or 8 different corn, and like Caitlin said, the BT and the non-BT versions. So
yeah.
Yep.
So I just want to cover a few management options or things to keep in mind. So number 1 is definitely scouting and reporting unexpected injury. Adrian covered the scouting really well. We have some fact sheets. We have lots of pictures and lots of people that you can call if you're not sure what you're looking at. So please do that. If you do find unexpected injury, so if you have a BT field and you're thinking, I should be protected from European corn borer, but I'm seeing a lot of damage, please call us. Please call your provincial extension people, call your seed supplier, and we will check that out further. The other thing that's really key is knowing which BT traits you have. So since we do have 4 different proteins, and we have kind of varying resistance to the different ones that we're seeing so far, knowing what you do have and therefore what your risk might be is really important. Insecticides got mentioned a couple of times, and Sebastian mentioned that as one of the things that they've had to do in Europe. But it is very tricky, just because there are not a ton of options, and it's very, very reliant on proper timing. So once those larvae hatch out of the eggs, they're really only sticking around on the surface of the plant for a few days before they're burrowing into the stalk. And once they go into the stalk, the insecticides aren't going to touch them. So it's a very narrow window to get out there and be able to spray them. There are also some insecticides available that have BT as their active ingredient. So it seems like that's probably not going to be an option to use those products either. So it kind of narrows the options even a little bit more. The other thing that Sebastian mentioned was trichogramma, which is a parasitic wasp. Again, it's highly reliant on proper timing, because the wasps need to be present in the field basically at the time of egg hatch, so that they can at the time of egg laying and egg hatch, so that they can parasitize the egg masses and prevent them from hatching into larvae. You mentioned it's pretty labor intensive. There is some really interesting work happening in Quebec. They use it fairly extensively in Quebec in sweet corn production, but they're doing some work in field corn to see if they can make that a little bit more of an economical and less labor intensive option. The other one Jocelyn mentioned off the bat, that ECB will eat almost anything. It has a lot of alternative hosts. So eliminating weed hosts around the fields, especially going into winter, can potentially help eliminate the habitat for them to overwinter in. But by far, the biggest thing prior to BT corn, and definitely something that they're using extensively in Europe, and something that I think that we need to start looking at now so that we can start integrating this into our management practices, is stock destruction. So that would be mowing or plowing in residue. And as I mentioned, it was one of the main methods of management prior to BT corn. There was some work done by Dr. Art Schaafsma in the 90s, and he found that at that time, 75% of overwintering larvae were found between the soil surface and 30 centimeters up the stalk. So even if we're thinking about silage production that does take the majority of the plant, we're still potentially seeing quite a few larvae in the piece that is left in the field. And more recently, in the past few years, as we've been looking at ECB more, we have found larvae as low as in the brace roots and even underground. So the closer we can get to the ground with this stock destruction, the better. In Dr. Schaafsma's study, it showed that flail mowing alone reduced the populations by up to 76%, overwintering populations, and moldboard plowing alone reduced populations by 22 to 33%. But of course, agronomic practices have changed significantly in North America over the last 30 years. And something like moldboard plowing in the fall is not something that we're encouraging, or not something a lot of people are doing anymore. We also have had a lot of equipment changes over that time. So there's a lot of interest now in looking at what the impact of this more modern equipment could be on this stock destruction and the overwintering of the ECB larvae. So that would be things like potentially high-speed discs, chopping corn heads, and so on. And that is, they did start to look at that in Ontario this past fall. So we're hoping to see some interesting results from that and continue that work to figure out what the best pieces of equipment that we do have available to us now will be for this purpose. Yeah, these are just some pictures of some kind of the before on the left-hand side, the during and the after, and you can see that this mower's really really shredded up those stalks quite a bit, and hopefully there will be minimal larvae to overwinter in those. I'm going to turn it over to Jason now.
No, I think you were doing great, Caitlin.
Well, thank you.
I will give you a break. So, so Caitlin showed this picture earlier. I bring it forward because it helps highlight the impact that corn borer can have on yield. So yield is impacted because the corn borer feeding, that tunneling that others have talked about in this presentation, can really impact the flow of nutrients and water and photosynthates within the plant. Adrian alluded to the red coloring in the plants. I mean, that's the photosynthesates that really don't have a place to go because they're being the flow of them is being cut off by those tunnels created by the ECB. So how this can impact yield, Sebastian mentioned stalk breakage. So if those plants get broken down and not being picked up by the silage harvester or the combine. The other thing that can go on is that the corn borer will bore into the shank of the ear. And if that tunneling within that shank becomes great enough, those ears may actually fall off and onto the ground and not be harvested. And that's to Sebastian's point about the wild hogs there in his story from Germany. So another way this can impact yield is if the stalk does remain standing, but we do get a heavy wind like we sometimes do in the Maritimes in early September, one of those hurricanes that tend to blow through, we tend to get a lot of stalk breakage. And it's sometimes hard to get a picture of how that looks, but this is a picture of a woodlot from Nova Scotia after Fiona, which was one of the hurricanes. And if a corn stand is significantly impacted by European corn borer and we get a wind come through, I kind of liken it to this picture of what it could look like with significant stalk breakage. Not a pretty scenario. So I know we are talking about insects, but the disease portion plays in as well. So we got the disease triangle up in the right of this slide. Susceptible host, which of course is the corn plant. Favorable environments, we then tend to have wet environmental conditions that can really promote pathogens and fungal infections of plants. And what easier way for a fungus to get in, or a fungus to get into a plant, than if the European corn borer opens a door for it to get in, whether that be into the cob or into the stalk itself. So these fungal infections, they can cause stalk and ear rots. And then under certain environmental conditions, when those fungal pathogens are really stressed, they can produce mycotoxins, which we all know can affect the feed quality, feedability of corn silage and grain corn. So here we have some data on the impact on corn yield. This one, of course, is on grain corn and not silage specifically, but we can see that the earlier the boring damage occurs within the plants, the greater the yield loss will occur, or the higher the yield loss that can occur. So we can see by these studies that some of the data is quite old. Caitlin and I and others have been throwing around the idea of how to assess the impact on modern hybrids. So hopefully we'll be able to pull a trial together to look at some more current information. Next slide, please, Adam. So again, a slide by Adrian's dad, Art Schassman, and his crew from a study, and this looks at DON or vomitoxin between BT and non-BT hybrids. And we can see that if there is ECB injury, greater than 4 centimeters of stalk tunneling, there can be significantly more DON within those non-BT plants. So not only will it impact yield, it can also impact the quality of the material that we end up feeding to our livestock. Caitlin, would you like to add anything to that? I kind of rifled through it pretty quick.
No, that was great. I do think just your point there about the feed quality. So this is not just a grain corn issue. This is a all corn issue, grain and silage both. And I think managing, especially the stalk destruction, and managing ECB in both grain and silage corn is going to be really key. There wasn't a question here that I'd like to answer right now, if that's okay with everybody. But yeah, just talking about fall tillage being mentioned, and if your field management is predominantly no-till, how is this going to affect that type of cropping program? And how is tillage going to affect greenhouse gas considerations? So that's a really excellent question. And I wish I had a really solid answer for it, but at this point, I don't. I think the work that we're looking at more modern equipment, is hopefully going to give us some options that aren't tillage for managing those stalks. And I think that's going to be really key, because there is so much more reduced tillage or no-till systems now than there were 30 years ago. So hopefully some of those other mowing destruction type options are going to work. And so stay tuned, I guess, for more information on that.
Yeah, and that's a great question. Just to jump in there, Caitlin, I do farm myself here in Ontario, and I guess chopping corn heads, columnar chopping rolls, yedder devastators, stalk stompers from a grain production standpoint really do aggressively chop and process that material up. So I think there is definitely improved technology from a harvesting standpoint that can help us break those stalks open and reduce that overwintering. And I mean, from Art's data there, mowing was really the main driver, right? So yeah, we're not encouraging everybody to go out and moldboard plow their fields, but certainly the combination of tillage and those flail mowing and destruction methods are going to be very important going forward.
Mhm. There's another one there that says, what about burning? It's something that has occurred to me, but I really don't have any information on it yet. I don't know if Adam or Jocelyn or anybody has any speculation
I'm
on that.
guessing it would roast the insects, but then you're certainly dealing with challenges in spreading fire. And I think the biggest concern from putting my agronomist hat on would be just the elimination of the carbon organic matter. Taking that out of the cropping system could be a detriment long term, but
For sure.
I'm sure they would die from fire if that was an option.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Jason and Caitlin. Pass it over to Kim and Kate.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I am Caitlin Kessheimer, and I'm here in the US with my colleague Kim Morell. And we're part of the group with many people on this call that did some field collections back in September in Eastern Canada. And they were brought to our insectary here in Tennessee. And what we do is we rear all the bad insects that you don't want in your field so we can do research and figure out how to stop them. And so we spent the last hour and change talking about, how terrible this pest is and all the damage it can cause and everything that's happened in the last 25 or 30 years. And so I just wanted to end it with, we are prioritizing this pest very much, both in our laboratory greenhouse and field research. And so after a lot of paperwork and many, many emails, we were successfully able to get some of those collected ECB from Eastern Canada to our insectary. We are now in the third generation of rearing them, and we are now using this colony for lab testing and looking at the characterization of resistance and how we got here we are, and obviously collaborating with Jocelyn and her lab. And hopefully we'll have just a lot of information on how to make sure that the traits we're putting forward on the market in years from now are going to be holding up to this pest. And paired with that is all the work that Kim will be doing here in 2025. And so I'll pass it to her to talk about that.
Yeah, so my name is Kim, and I represent teams of scientists that are working together to discover and develop new proteins that we're excited to bring to your farms in the future to be able to control this pest moving forward. We're always working on multiple generations of new products at the same time. So right now in my role, I'm actually working on 2 new generations of products, multiple new proteins that we'll be able to deliver to you. But research does take time. And so we expect the first of these new products to be available in the mid-2030s. And then the second of these new products to be available in the late 2030s. And so we're working as fast as we can to be able to get these solutions to you. So far in our testing, they are looking fantastic, providing really excellent control of the European corn borer. But really for us, pressure testing these new traits is so important. And we really want to expose these traits to the worst conditions that you're experiencing as farmers to make sure that they do stay strong and that they do provide the level of control that we need. And so that segues into the second piece of what we're doing, which is a lot of field trials. We're really excited that from the scouting efforts and the larval collections that we did at the end of last year, that we were able to identify 2 new farms that we can conduct field trials in. These are in Kings County, New Brunswick. And these are locations where when we visited, the farmers were experiencing very high pressure from these insects, and including seeing some breakthrough damage on the VT Double Pro. So I think these are really perfect locations for us to be able to put our new genetics and see how well they work. But I would say that, we're definitely looking to continue expanding this testing moving forward. So if you are feeling like you're seeing a lot of European corn borer on your farms and you'd like us to come and visit and help take a look and see what's going on, and if you may be open to helping host some of these trials for us in the future, these are opportunities that really help us make sure that we can develop the strongest products we can moving forward. And so we're always hopeful that we can identify some opportunities like that. So if this sounds like something of interest, definitely please reach out to me, Kim, or Caitlin Kessheimer if you're interested. And yeah, we look forward to continuing the conversation and being able to deliver some new BT traits as soon as we possibly can.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete and Kim. So just to wrap things up here, I know we're getting close to the end of our time. Really, just a couple high-level thoughts here. I mentioned we're still observing broad trait efficacy, but we have and are seeing pockets, and I would say anything, well, certainly all of Prince Edward Island, anything up to Fredericton, New Brunswick, and east in the north half of Nova Scotia, I think we need to be certainly very concerned about. And those populations are going to require attention. So scouting, it's not an easy task. The first year was a great learning year for us in 2023. Super happy with the experience and findings we had in 24 and looking forward to having another broad scouting program in 2025. But when you're out there during the season, if you have questions on what you're seeing, if you want somebody to come out and have a look, please reach out to your extension, your retail agronomist. Certainly, we'll be out and about along with our Ag Call scouts. So if you are seeing hotspots, please do reach out to your local agronomy advisor. And the last point here, this issue isn't unfortunately going to go away. We really need to continue focus in IPM practices, stock mowing, flail mowing. Really, in my mind, it should be a standard part of growing corn, either grain or silage in the Maritimes going forward. And you heard from Kimberly that, our next traits that do look very encouraging are a decade or so away. So unfortunately, what we have to work with today, it is still working, but they are chewing more than they should be able to. So really trying to minimize the economic impacts long-term is really what we need to be focused on going forward. So not to sound too alarmist, but that was really one of the purposes of today, along with the education of what the pest is and how to manage it, is really to highlight that we're going to have to use all the tools that we have at our disposal to manage this pest for the next foreseeable future. And hopefully we can work together as an industry to be successful in that. So I know we covered a lot of content today. I'll just flip it over to the last slide here with the CCA QR code there if you have your app and want to grab some credits. But we're certainly happy to answer any questions. And I don't know, Randy, if we have one more poll to throw at the audience here.
We do. Yeah, and folks, go ahead, put your questions in the Q&A. We will definitely address them, but here's one last poll that we'll get your input on. Are you prepared to manage European corn borer going forward? Did you learn a lot from this session today and you're confident and you feel like, you know what, I think I get it? Or are you somewhat confident, but you need a little bit more information in that? Or are you kind of starting at square one because you have not experienced this insect before? So give you a little time there to address that poll question. You do have a question that you would like answered from our great subject matter experts here that are on the phone. Please put it in the Q&A and we'll jump right on it. So we'll give you a little bit more time here to answer that poll. You know what? Let's go 5 more seconds. All righty. So about 70% said, you know what, I'm somewhat confident, but I could still use more information and more training. In that, about 30% said, you know what, I get it. I can train on this stuff if I need to. So that's good. And you gain knowledge there, and that's a good thing. With that, Adam, I'm not seeing any questions popping in. So maybe what we do is, you know, kind of do a quick, do you have a last comment type of thing? And do you want to say some final words? And
Yeah,
we
no,
can
just
call out anybody on that if you want, or you can do
yeah,
it.
for sure. Yeah, if any panelist wants to jump on here, I just want to again thank everybody for their time. We know time is our most valuable resource, and it's very limited. But yeah, appreciate the time today, and hopefully the information we shared is going to be helpful going forward and trying to manage this pest as a collective industry in the future.
I just want to add
Anybody?
thanks to everybody for tuning in today. And please tell your friends, tell your coworkers. We're doing this same webinar again next Friday, March 28th. So there's another chance to soak up all this information. So anybody you know who's growing corn, please tell them. I think this will be a valuable some valuable information for them.
All right. Well, thank you to all of our presenters and experts that have been on this call. And we sure appreciate all your information and your presentation skills here. With that, I think we can go ahead and we can probably wrap this up. And as Caitlin mentioned, we're going to do this all over again next week. If you think you want to listen in or you think of a question you want to ask at that point, jump back on. So with that, thank you, everybody. Adam, we're going to call it a day. All right. Thanks, everybody. We can stop the recording now and we'll